Here we go.
Okay, welcome to our December meeting. Thank you for being here, everybody. We have a lot to cover, so we are gonna move quickly. I see that Mark, our third Mark, just joined, and Diane joined us too. So we were just asking if there were any changes or proposed changes to the agenda, and I see Dan MacArthur's hand up. Do you have a proposed change, Dan?
My question is, on the agenda, there's an item that I don't understand. Task force in response to resolution I.O. I'm just wondering what that is.
Yeah, we'll talk. Yeah, it will come back to you. It's one of the resolutions and that we passed, and we'll get to that, and you will remember once we get to that.
Okay. All right. Great. Thanks.
Is that okay? And
Yep.
unless we have changes, I also wanted to remind you guys that because we are going to be doing some interviews, we're going to be turning also our camera off for this next item and the third one. So item 2 and 3, we're going to turn the camera off.
The recording.
The recording, sorry, the camera off. The recording, that's what I meant. It's like it's live, the camera. So we're going to turn the recording off. So now I would like to welcome Sonia Trainer from the National School Boards Association.
Do you want me to turn off now?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Turning off.
Gary.
At the long okay, so yeah, I got the fact that we're recording. That's fine. There we go. So what that does, and this is very simplistic, but what that does automatically is that drops the spending per pupil. Your homestead tax rate is based on your spending per pupil. If the tax rate goes down, not enough money comes into the education fund. So the property yield also has to go down, as does the income yield. They both have to go down to bring enough money into the education fund. So when you're seeing a number this year for the property yield of $15,443, you cannot compare that to what's being projected right now for next year of $9,452 because of what I just explained. Is that making sense to everyone? Okay. All right. So where do you want to go from here? I mean, Commissioner Bolio did lay out some of the factors that are driving this, and this is what I came. Basically, that's what I told him because he asked, and it's what I heard from your business managers. That was the information that I was getting from them. What was really kind of pushing and driving things. So I mean, you have inflation, you have 16% increase in healthcare costs. You have the end of ESSER money, and some people do legitimately feel they need to keep some of those positions for their kids because even though the money's going away, the problems haven't gone away that the COVID pandemic created. So that's incorporated in some of this. You have, I mentioned inflation. There's debt service coming in. You know, the buildings are not in good shape in pretty much across the board in the state, it seems. I have not looked at the facilities report that came out, I think, a week or so ago, but I understand it's out. You guys may have seen it at this point, but I have not seen it yet. But anyway, all of those things are going to add money. Even if you forgot the new change in pupil weighting, I'd be willing to bet, and you guys know better than I do, there'd probably be an 8 or 9% increase in education spending anyway, just based on those factors. When you factor in the change in weighting, in pupil weighting, what that's doing is that's giving some districts that have historically not had taxing capacity because their pupil count has not been properly, what's the word I want? Has not been properly done for all, yeah, it's not the right word, but it hasn't been properly done because the factors were wrong and the weights were too low. So what we're seeing is some districts who have high poverty populations, high EL populations, are sparse. Those populations need money. They need more additional funding. And so what you're seeing a lot of in the background, you're not seeing it because I didn't show you the specific data, but you know your costs are going up because of that. By the same token, those districts that were not advantaged by the weighting formula, they can't cut immediately without really harming their students. So it's a process. That's why the 5% cap was put in, was to kind of protect those towns, those school districts that cannot cut quickly. So it's a whole mishmash of things happening that are going on that are driving this tax rate letter. Do you guys have any questions? I mean, I can talk and talk forever, as most of you probably know at this point. I prefer not to. I'd rather answer questions that you might have, because that will help me focus. So if anybody have any questions, you can interrupt anytime you want to.
Board members, there any specific questions for Brad at this time? Neil.
Brad, you had mentioned that part of, I guess, your view of this, it wasn't as bad as you thought it could have been, was the result of a, my term, not yours, healthy grand list.
Yeah.
Is that an increase in the number of properties in the state, an increase in the valuation, a combination of both? And if it was a combination of both, does one outweigh the other?
I would think it's probably more a combination of the value, or not a combination, but more of the value, Neil. I've not talked to the tax department. They're the ones who put those numbers out. I've just, I've talked to them peripherally. But the grand list is pretty strong. And I mean, I know in my town, I live in Stowe. I know in my town, the housing values are absurd. If I wanted to go somewhere, now is the time to sell my house. But I have nowhere to go, and I don't want to go anywhere either. But I think across the board in the state, the values themselves have gone up significantly because there's a lot of money in cities that people are kind of spending when they come up here. I don't think there's been that much new growth in terms of sticks and bricks. Clearly there's some, but I don't think there's a huge amount that's really pushing it. My guess is, and I don't know for a fact, my guess is it's more just the valuation of the properties that it's going up. Fair market value has gone up.
Jim.
Yeah, Brett, very, very helpful background and info. One thing that honestly scares the heck out of me right now is you brought up the 5% cap. And that seems to likely be a potentially snowballing problem for us for several years, especially if you have districts, a lot of districts probably taking advantage of that cap, and it couldn't add up to a significant amount of money. That where are we going to find the funding for it? Do you have any thoughts on how big that could get or how it might be addressed?
Okay, this is my personal opinion. I think the first year is going to be the worst year. To be perfectly honest, I think what's going to happen is a significant number of districts are going to hit that 5% cap, and that's baked into the numbers that you're seeing here on the December 1 letter. But I think next year, I don't think there's going to be that big jump in spending that people are going to be seeing this year. And the reason I say that is because you have to go back and talk to your voters and get your budget passed. If you have a tax rate of $1.40, hypothetically speaking, you have a tax rate of $1.40 this year, or in this year, FY24, and you're capped. Let's say your calculated tax rate, let's say 10% more, so it'd be $1.54. 14 cents plus $1.40 is $1.54. If you're capped at 5%, your tax rate's going up 7%. You can probably convince your voters, well, we're getting double that this first year. But next year, when you go out and say, we want to cap it again, that's an additional 7.5 cents or so that you're going to have to get your voters to swallow and pay for. I'd be really surprised if voters are going to do that, frankly. Then the year after that, it's another 8 cents. So I don't think there's going to be this continual march of cap districts going out for 5 years. I think what's going to happen is this first year, you're going to see quite a few, and then it's going to start to tail off. I think there will be some districts that go all the way out for the 5 years, but I don't think there's going to be that many.
Michael.
Yeah, do you have any insight into what assumptions the tax department might have made about the CLA in doing that tax letter? Because I'm hearing that that's not been determined and they're having a lot of problems with that.
I've not heard anything about the CLA, but basically, I mean, if you go back to what the balance sheet is showing, I think Craig is talking about it in his letter. Maybe it was Jake Feldman who wrote the first part of the letter. It's the grand list growth. That's kind of tied up in the CLA. So if the grand list growth is growing by 14%, that means it's a strong CLA. Most towns are not reappraising. That means CLAs are going to drop. But again, it's kind of all baked together in how things are coming out in this letter. The strong grand list is reflected by a low CLA if the town hasn't reappraised, and which I think is what you're referring to. I have not heard anything. I know that not tax rates, that the CLA should be coming out anytime, but I had not heard they're having issues with it or problems with it. So I can check on that because I'm curious about it now. So I will check on that just to find out for me.
You, Brad, Dan?
Yeah, sort of along the same lines, Brad, as what Michael just asked. Is the 5% cap going to be subjected to the CLA calculation? My guess is it probably is.
No.
But maybe you understand what I'm asking, I think.
I do. And that's a good question because I always forget people aren't really in the weeds like I'm in the weeds, which good for you. No, the cap is at the school district level. School districts do not have CLAs. Towns have CLAs because towns have the grand list. What happens is the school district comes up with the tax rate, and the tax rate they calculate is what's called the equalized tax rate. That's the one that you calculate that you see before the CLA adjustment. And that's what the rate would be if properties were at fair market value. They aren't. And so the tax rate, once it goes to the towns, gets adjusted by the CLA at that point. So the capping is at the equalized rate. So your FY24 rate, which again, Nicole and I put out for everybody, along with what recalculated FY24 spending would be per pupil. That's the number that you're going against. So again, using my hypothetical example of $1.40, your tax rate, if you were capped at 5%, would be $1.47, 7 cents plus $1.40. But then when that $1.47 goes to the towns, some town may have reappraised and the CLA is 110%. So that $1.47 would be like making up a number, $1.36 on somebody's tax rate in that town. In another town that belongs to the same school district, they also start at $1.47, but their CLA has dropped, say, 70%. And so that's going to push their tax rate up significantly to close to $2. But it's the same tax rate. It's just a difference in the CLA. And the dirty secret, again, we've kind of danced around without stating it specifically. The dirty secret is you pay based on your pay taxes on your fair market value, not your listed value. And that's why the tax rate is adjusted by the CLA. It's bringing it up to what it should be to account for the under or over appraisal. That help?
So I think what you're saying is that the 5% is going to come into effect after the CLA has been taken into account for that, what people actually have to write checks for. Is that correct?
No, the 5% happens first at the school district level. Then that capped rate then goes out to the towns. So say you've got 2 towns, then that capped rate goes out to 2 towns. Then each town adjusts that capped tax rate by their respective CLAs. Okay.
Neil and then Barbara.
Yeah, just quick, actually to add to what Brad was talking about the CLA, I actually did see communication recently that they are having issues calculating the CLAs. And I think that they were targeting January 1 to have that done by, and I think they've said it'll be lucky if we have it done by January 1.
Oh, that's interesting because they usually have started releasing them right about now. So that's interesting.
Yeah, and they said do not expect anything prior to January 1.
Interesting. Thank you.
They have had software problems. Jill had communicated with Sue. And
Yes, I put something in our weekly update email yesterday from Jill Remick that said normally they would get the CLA information out about this time of the year. And I believe they statutorily have a January 1 deadline. They're still expecting to meet that, but it'll be right, on target, and it won't be early like it usually is.
Good to know. Thank you.
And what she said is they wanted to be right rather than be wrong and then have to redo but in any event, Barbara. You're muted, Barbara.
Okay, sorry. This is kind of a rhetorical question or maybe a troublemaker question, but we're all dancing around, not dancing around, but really concerned about all these different factors and moving things around and what our tax rate is going to be. Has there been any discussion that maybe the general fund transfer has to be raised a little bit to reduce the taxes on the burden on the town in view of all the things that were listed in that nice letter that said this is why, all of the expenses that the schools have that are many of which are completely beyond their control. And instead of saying, you should be working harder to reduce spending, it's like, I think it's time for the state to maybe look at that. I just wonder if there's any talk of that whatsoever that you heard, or maybe I should be asking Sue this and the people around the State House to be around the State House.
Yeah, it's a good question, Barbara. And hello, by the way. It's a good question. To go to the general fund transfer, the short and sweet answer to that is no, because there is no longer a general fund transfer. It was stopped 4 or 5. I want to say 2017. So that'd be 6 years ago. I can't remember exactly when it stopped.
Oh, I'm way out of date.
Yeah, we are. But the sales and use tax was increased to 100%. So we lost the general fund transfer, the ed fund, but we gained all of the sales and use tax, whereas before I think we had a third of it, something like that. So anyway, so the answer to the general fund question is no. But this is going to be up to the legislature. There is money sitting in the 5% reserve. There's got 2 cats here now at the moment. There's $55.6 million sitting in the reserve, that 5% for this year's. They could tap into that and give some relief. Again, it's all legislative decision. They could find a new revenue source. What it would be, I have no idea. But one thing they could easily do is they could say, well, the sales and use tax is 6%. Bump it up a penny. If you bumped it up a penny to 7%, that would give you roughly about another $100 million.
So,
So I mean, it's really, I mean, my guess is, well, I will tell you, there was not a lot of discussion within the legislature when this passed, and they were looking at what the potential impacts were going to be. At least not that I heard, and I happened to be in the committee rooms quite a bit at that point.
right. So if you raise the sales and use tax, the 1%, and raise 100 million, I know you can't really tell me, but what impact would that have on the tax rate for the average town?
I don't know.
It's too complicated.
Well, if you're bringing, if we're, well, in very rough terms, and this is really rough and off the top of my head, this 12% is increasing education spending by about $200 million, roughly.
So that would take care of half of it.
It's about half of it. So you can take them there. Again, I don't know what they're thinking. I've not talked to any legislators about this. Part of me wants to say to kind of see this whole thing through, but I'm not going to. But it's interesting. This is it's going to be an interesting discussion. My guess is there are going to be a lot of bills that come out right away that are going to start addressing this, because I don't think legislators fully understood the impact of this. I think what they thought was it's all going to take care of itself. Not quite. We're seeing that now, I think.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Mark?
Hi, Brad. We're really going to miss you. You've been great on the communication side and your attitude. This might be a softball question. Is the transparency of the application of the weighting factors pretty apparent to the business managers so they can explain it to us board members how the impact is going to be?
I think so. I think so. I've spent a lot of time talking to the business managers about what's happening with it. And I reran the student data we had for FY23 and the student data we have for FY24 with the best information we had using the new weighting formula. So those were put out a year, 6 months to a year ago, something like that. we're in the process right now of getting the numbers you're going to actually be using in FY25. We're in that process right now, and there's some issues happening, but we're making progress. So I think what's going to happen is I think the numbers for most people are going to come in higher than what I put out as estimates earlier for people. And that has to do largely with how we're changing, how we're counting, I guess more broadly, the federal poverty level kids, kids under the federal poverty level, because we're taking that from a wider variety of sources. So that's what people are working on right now. But I think most business managers have a fairly good idea of how this is working. You can always ask them. Nicole and I sent out a template that pulled in the FY24 counts because it's a 2-year average that we start with. It pulls in the FY24 counts. They could put in what they thought they knew for the FY25 counts because we didn't have that information at that point. And that would then calculate what's going to happen with your long-term weighted ADM for FY25. You could ask them about that because most of them use that and they had a pretty good understanding of how it was working and the various factors.
Thank you, Brad.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you for being here. Any other questions from board members? Otherwise, I have a quick question first. What is the name of your cat? I just saw it.
This one right here is Millie. She's the 19-year-old. The one who jumped in front was black. I picked him up and moved him. That's Merlin, and his brother is Zeus. They're a year and a half old. They love her. It's not reciprocated.
Okay, they're gonna keep you busy. This is just as board, because we're a lot of board members here that will go back to their boards. If you have any advice, just as we put this into context, as we're gonna pass the budgets, right? You gave us some really great explanations of the 5% cap and not wanting to hit the cap, because that's a question that's come in my district several times. People saying, oh, we could hit the cap 3 years in a row, don't want to do that. So if we were to, we're going to be putting reports out and trying to sell our narrative. You mentioned, so putting into context the macroeconomic context of where we are in Vermont is one of the things that I'm just sort of paraphrasing of what you were saying. What are the drivers, right? And then for us as board members explaining what have we done to make reductions, right, in our cost, because the new pupil weighting study, which is not pupil weighting anymore, is going to be the worst on this first year, right?
Right. I think so.
And then it just as final thought, what would be the last part? You were saying the CLA, it shouldn't be one of the, because of the healthy grant list, the CLA is not something that you seem particularly worried with because that's left to the towns. What last piece of advice would you have for us to add a third layer to that narrative that we're trying to put to our readers?
Yeah, I mean, you can't control the CLA. You have no control whatsoever over that. I think the best advice I would have is that if you're close to that 5% tax cap, to use it to your advantage. That's again what that's doing is inflating education spending somewhat, but I think that's what's just going to happen naturally anyway. And so I think that's probably the thing to do, is to look at where you fall in terms of that. I was talking to a business manager the other day, and they said that they could have a 3-4% increase in tax rates if they used a surplus. If they didn't use a surplus, their tax rate would be probably 7 or 8% increase, and they would get capped by the 5%. So that becomes, I'm bringing this up simply because it's a discussion point. So that becomes a decision as to how you want to use a surplus. It may benefit you to save that surplus for the year out, to talk to the voters about that. But again, it's going to be difficult to sometimes in a lot of districts to get them to take that 5% rate increase. I think that's going to be difficult. I wish I had good advice for you. I don't. Usually I have some idea of where things are going, and right now I just don't.
Well, thank you so much for your time with us today. We really appreciate you coming out when you're on vacation. I see, Michael, you have your hand up. You have one last thought?
Yeah, I just want to, it's maybe a comment more than a question. It really is a comment more than a question, but want to be careful about over promising on the 5% cap, because the CLA is a significant factor in some districts. And it, you know, it's additive, right, in a lot of ways. So there may be a 5% cap on the tax rate that comes from the school district, but the tax rate people are going to see on their bills will include the CLA adjustment. So they may, you know, in our area, they may be seeing 12. If we go at 5, they may be seeing 12.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, Michael. Is because the cap, they're not going to necessarily see the cap. I mean, it's going to be better because of the cap, but they're still getting impacted by that CLA because their grand list is so low compared to fair market value. So they are going to see that spike, that jump in actual taxes out of their pocket. And that leads me to the income sensitivity people. There is nothing in there about a cap for them. They're based on the 5% cap and whatever the CLA is doing. That's the driver. Then the tax credit, though, is based on data from this year, which does not have all these factors in it. It has other factors, clearly, but it doesn't have all these factors in it. So that first year, even the people who are protected by income sensitivity will probably see a pretty big spike in their taxes also, unless the legislature decides to act quickly, which I have my doubts they will do.
Yeah, we're trying to be very careful about over-promising what the cap will do for people, and then have them come in August and say, why did my dollar figure go up by 12%?
Yeah.
You told me 5. So just a comment.
No, I don't disagree.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Well, thank you, Brad. As Sue said, you're going to be greatly missed. Thank you for the time with us today, for your service to Vermont and all his children for so many years.
Thank you all very much for putting up with me all these years. And if you have further questions that come up in a later discussion, just send them to Sue or send them directly to me. I still will be checking email. I'm not gone. So feel free to ask.
Okay. Thanks again.
Okay. Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
All right, board. Let me see. Okay. Did we lose? Oh, no, there's Linda. Okay. So what I'm going to suggest, reverse to not send Linda out right now, that we keep going. And when we get to consent agenda, we move into the appointment so that we don't have to be sending Linda in and out of our meeting, and we just do it right at the end. Can everybody keep fresh in their memory, their notes from the interviews? All right. So let's move to the legislative priorities. And I'm gonna, that legislative planning that was part of your packet, great information. I'm gonna give this back to Sue and to Kara. Sue.
Thanks, Flor. I just wanted to let the board know we've been working really hard to prepare for the start of the legislative session, and our preparations this year have been enhanced greatly by having Kara on the staff on a full-time basis. Based on the existing and recently passed resolutions, Kara prepared the legislative platform handout that's in your meeting packet. It's on pages 14 and 15. Carrie contributed by developing the graphic designs. And I'm going to hand the microphone over to Kara now to give an overview of that legislative platform handout and the topics that we anticipate that the legislature may be delving into during the upcoming session.
Thank you, Sue. We will talk about the strategic plan later in the evening, but I wanted to make the connection between the development of this legislative platform handout with our strategic plan, specifically objective 3.2, which calls on VSBA staff to effectively represent VSBA's positions and resolutions in state policy decisions. Under that objective, we have KR 3.2.1 legislative advocacy that states by December 31, 2025, the VSBA resolutions and actions influence legislation and policy as reported to the board. So the idea for this handout came from Sandra, who discovered a similar handout that the Montana School Board Association created. And we thought it would be great if we could create something similar for VSBA. As you can see in your packet, the first page, we imagine that this is going to be a one-page double-sided handout that will circulate. So as you can see, the first page is a description of who we are as an organization, our mission, our vision, our beliefs, and some facts about you, our members. Sue testifies at the start of every session and includes this information in her testimony, but we thought it would be helpful to have a document that legislators can easily reference and something that you, our members, can also use to educate your legislators. On what will be the backside, or what is now page 15 in your packet, is an overview of the VSBA resolutions process. And some of the resolutions we passed or reaffirmed, or you passed or reaffirmed at your annual business meeting. We want legislators to know what our members have prioritized for the session. We also want them to understand that the positions that VSBA takes on bills and when VSBA staff testify are grounded in these resolutions that are written and adopted by our members. So looking ahead, thank you for sharing that. Looking ahead to the start of the next resolution cycle, we are also hoping that we can share this handout with our members during the annual solicitation for resolution submissions to encourage more boards to submit resolutions. By connecting the resolutions to the legislative process more broadly, we hope that our members see how their work influences education laws and policy in Vermont and will be motivated to submit resolutions for consideration. Unless you have any questions, I was going to move on to hot topics for the upcoming session. And I can't see Flora, but if you want to take any questions.
I just suggested Carrie that she shared the screen so people can
No,
see.
thank you for doing that.
Any questions, board members? Otherwise, we'll keep going.
All right.
I don't see any hands. Go ahead.
Okay. The second half of the biennium starts on Wednesday, January 3rd. And we, as Sue mentioned, have been busy preparing, working with amongst ourselves and hearing from legislators to identify a list of topics that we anticipate legislators will be focusing on. Those include PCBs, restraint and seclusion, cell phones, pre-K, state board configuration, harassment, AOE funding and capacity, school construction, CTE funding, pupil weighting, mental health, remote school board meetings, statewide framework for ethics, educator, workforce, and mascots. So it's a lengthy list, and we definitely anticipate it being a busy session.
Thank you, Kara. If there's no any questions from board members, we're going to move on. The legislative platform looks great. I really want to thank you, all the staff, for all the work. Thanks, Sandra, for the idea. And we will be posting the document in the VSBA website. And we're going to start to, so that all VSBA members have access to it. And we're going to plan some communications once the session gets started, so that our regions use this to communicate. And if you don't have any questions, we'll move right along. I don't see any hands up, but we're going to try to use this document so you can have a better way to communicate priorities with your legislators, as a lot of you meet with them in January in your boards too. Okay, so we're going to move number 6, update on Secretary of Education search. Sue, any wisdom here?
Well, actually, it's a very short update because there's not very much to report. On November 15th, the state board forwarded 3 names to the governor for consideration for the position of secretary. Those names are not public information, so I don't know who they are. We do know that there were 19 applicants and 7 of those applicants were interviewed by the State Board's Secretary Search Committee. Governor Scott has not appointed a secretary at this point, and the State Board meets again on December 20th. So it's likely we might learn some more about the status of the search at that State Board meeting. And that's really all I have for this agenda item.
Thank you, Sue, for looking into it. I'm not going to ask if anybody has any questions because we don't have any answers. So we're going to move right until number 7. When we have some answers, we'll report back. So update on the State Board rulemaking, EQS Rule 2200 series. And I'm again going to give it to Sue, who's been involved in this and testifying for us. Go ahead, Sue.
Okay, so the public comment period for the EQS, which is also called the Rule 2000 series, closed on October 25th. The State Board, a State Board committee has been meeting to process all of the comments that they received. VSBA submitted comments earlier this fall. The committee is aiming to provide a final draft of the rules for the State Board's review at the board's December meeting. So we'll know more after the board's December meeting about the status of the EQS. And the public comment period on the State Board's Rule 2200 series, which is independent school approval, closed on December 5th. And VSBA submitted a memo as part of the Education Equity Alliance, identifying areas from the education quality standards that were not carried over to the independent school rules. And we anticipate that a State Board committee will soon begin processing all of the public comments before bringing those rules back to the full State Board. The memo that we submitted is in your packet. Some of the major points made in that memo are that the word discrimination and the term restorative practices those two things are defined differently in the 2 rule series. There were 16 words that are defined in EQS and not defined in the independent school rules, and that there were many sections of the EQS that are missing from the independent school rules, such as professional learning, access to instructional materials, and reporting of results. So you can read all of that in the memo. And that really concludes my update on what's happening with the rules.
Thank you, Sue. Any questions? Thank you for putting that memo together, Sue, and for your time testifying. We're going to move into number 8, communications with our regions. Thanks to all of you who have sent emails school board members to your regions recently. So within the past month, I just want to give a shout out to Bennington, Central Vermont, Franklin, Grand Isle, Western Chittenden, and Windham. And I will encourage every region, it's not too late to communicate with your members by sending an early January email. We're going to be putting some things on our website, and it could be a legislative platform like we were talking. And in late January, we will start doing appreciation for school board members, which is in February. The VSBA will provide a sample of emails and communications to do that. So be looking, be looking for that. Italian speaker emails. Does anyone have any questions on that? On communications that I might have missed? I don't see any hands up. So this is the item that Dan, you had a question on. So the task force resolution 1, it looks like an I, but it's a numeral 1. Is the VSBA at the VSBA annual meeting? We passed their packet on page 33. The resolution calls upon the VSBA to convene a task force to assess the concerns regarding. I'm just going to read it so that everybody we're recording. A task force to assess the concerns regarding concerns regarding and failures of the State Board of Education and the Agency of Education, and thereafter the providing the governor and the legislature no later than January 25 with a list of recommended actions they should take in order to provide appropriate supports towards the education of Vermont students. So the executive committee met a few weeks ago and had a discussion, how do we do this work? How do we convene a task force? And I know that Mark had volunteered to help us with this too, but we said that the first step is to send an email to school board chairs. So what we said is that the plan is to appoint a task force made out of school chairs in all our regions, or an appointee by the school chair. But the first step is to send an email to school board chairs in early January and ask for volunteers to the task force. We're looking for people that understand the agency of education and the type of support it should be providing to the school boards. And that's why we were thinking of school board chairs. We also be asking to help from our educational partners, like the resolution said. So we're gonna ask for VSA, VPA, VCSEA, and VSBA to appoint a person to provide input to this task force. And that's where we are right now. So it was really just an update, we didn't want you to think that we had forgotten about this. And we will continue to keep the board updated as we have, once we have a task force.
Great, thanks, Flora. I appreciate that. I just didn't read all the way down through all of everything that came in that package.
Okay, that's okay. Any questions or concerns with that? And executive committee members, if I forgot something, please.
Just a quick, could the initial email go out sooner? I know that holidays are coming up, but if you're sending out the initial ask in January, you're not going to get people to respond in February. You're looking at probably having the task force start up maybe in March, and it's got a due date a year from now. So there is a very narrow time frame.
Yeah, we talked about that. We felt like January, sending it out in January might get people to actually look at it, because it's just really busy around the end of the year. We had a hard time getting enough responses even for BHI, and I know that is different, but we could try to change that time frame.
I'm just worried about by the time this actually gets off the ground and work starts going, we're going to be down to 8 months to do a report that really probably would take 3 years. So I'm just worried about the clock, the ticking of the clock. That's all.
Okay, we'll bring that up. I'll put it in our to-do for the executive committee. What about that? Sounds good. I see 2 other hands up, Suzanne and then Melanie.
2 things. One, some school board chairs may be, such as in our district, may be exceptionally new to school boards and such. So I'm not sure how specific your letter needs to be for them to understand what the ask is. I agree with Mark that sooner rather than later for the letter. And could we as VSBA members be copied on it so that we can maybe prod our board chairs if necessary?
Sure. Yes. Yeah, we'll send that and include everybody. Melanie?
Well, I know this is probably a sticky wicket, but I'm going to ask anyway. I'm curious if there was any thought given to including Vermont Independent School Association, since they are also affected by some of the work that's not being done by the SBE right now. And just if that might be worth considering in the future, because they are a partner in some respect to educating students in Vermont. I understand it's a different structure, but important all the same.
Sue, I don't see a problem with that. We can we will discuss this in executive committee, and it's, it could also be one of the partners, so not necessarily part of the committee, but one of the partners that we could consult with and find out what is not going well for you guys. Does that sound appropriate and okay with you, Sue?
Yeah, I think it's up. I mean, it's really up to the executive committee or the board. I don't have I should pull up the language of the resolution in front of me. I don't think the language of the resolution limits who you can consult with. So I think you could consult with whoever the task force wants to consult with.
Yeah. So thank you, Melanie. Okay. So with that, we can move into our VSBA strategic plan monitoring report. So we received a lot of information. I'm going to give it to you, Sue, so that Kara and everybody can.
Yeah, I'll get us started and then other staff members will chime in. There's a lot of information in the strategic monitoring report as usual. It begins on page 22 of your packet and has information about what the staff's been doing in the past month to advance the goals in the plan. Something I wanted to mention to you, and I didn't include it in the monitoring report, but thought it was worth noting that I was on a panel earlier today for the NSBA's Rural Education Summit. And it was a really educational and worthwhile event for me as the summit delved into the challenges faced by rural districts across the nation. And I hope some of you were able to tune into the summit today, which was a free online event offered by the NSBA. I really enjoyed serving on the panel with colleagues from Maine, Kansas, and Alaska. So moving on, I just wanted to also let you know Sandra had to leave this meeting early because she's meeting with a superintendent evaluation committee tonight. She's currently working on 3 superintendent evaluations, and she's very busy with those. She's been doing a lot of night meetings with these evaluation committees. Sandra's also been leading our staff in learning about the use of inclusive language. And I think what I'll do, so you can get an example of what we've been learning about, I'll send the board an email with some of the information that she's provided the staff and that we're working on. So I'm now going to turn it over to Kara and Debbie and Carrie in that order, to highlight a few pieces of the strategic plan monitoring report from their perspective. So Kara, can you get us started first?
I can. I covered the legislative platform handout earlier this evening and made the connection to the strategic plan monitoring report. I just wanted to add that I attended the all-member briefing at the State House on December 1st, which was very helpful to our preparations for the beginning of the legislative session in January. Debbie.
Thanks, Kara. I just wanted to tell you all about 2 webinars that we've held since the last time we met. They were a bit different from the ones that we normally offer, both in terms of topic and delivery. So in November, we had a webinar called Act 127 and Other Fiscal Dynamics for Fiscal Year 25 Budgeting, which was co-hosted and co-organized with the Vermont Superintendents Association. So the purpose of this webinar was to provide an update to both board members and superintendents simultaneously on the anticipated changes to the fiscal year 25 budgeting cycle, obviously highlighting the act, but also talking about the other fiscal factors or the other driving factors that were anticipated to drive costs up, as we talked about with Brad earlier. So really our objective in holding this one in November was to provide this information ahead of the rollout of budgets to school boards to better equip the boards to understand these cost drivers and the impact on their budgets for the fiscal year. We had a great panel composed of members representing different organizations. Obviously, the Vermont Superintendents Association and the VSBA were there. Thank you very much, Neil, for your time. The AOE and VSBA were also represented. We had over 200 registrants. I think it was 210. And the feedback we got on the webinar was extremely positive. And that is, I don't know, for any of you who haven't attended one of our webinars before live, what happens is once you sign off or once the webinar concludes, a little evaluation tool just pops up automatically. So we had over 70 people fill that survey out. And again, the comments were very positive. So we were happy to have offered that. Then just last night, we had our second webinar, which was called Get on Board, pre-candidate training for the public, members of the public. So that's a little bit different as well, because it was in the evening and it was for the public, not school board members. And that idea came from our strategic plan, KR 2.1.1, which says that we will conduct an annual webinar for potential school board candidates for at least 40 registrants. And I'm happy to report that we actually exceeded that goal. We had 47 and 34 who attended live. And again, we recorded it, so anybody who registered will be able to view it later. And also just anybody who comes to our website and looks it up under the archived webinars will see it. The fact that we exceeded our goal, 40 members in the first year, is in part to sharing it on Front Porch Forum, which we found was a very effective way to get the word out. And I have you all to thank for that, because I think it came out of our last VSBA board meeting, where one of you suggested that we put it out on Front Porch Forum. So we asked every staff member to do that, as well as Floor. And I think that had a good, that was part of the reason we had a decent turnout. Floor opened us up with a really heartfelt welcome message that we recorded ahead of time. And Sue walked us through the roles and responsibilities of the school board, covering the 6 pillars of essential school board work, the eligibility requirements, as well as the steps that you have to take to run for your school board, both in the context of the Australian ballot as well as the town meeting. Then we had a panel of 4 current school board members who talked about their own experience working as school board members across the state. And then, so that was it. That took us to our full hour. And we anticipate that this will be repeated again every December. It seems like the timing's good. But I did want to mention that this webinar is just one piece of the overall campaign of trying to get people to run for school board. So we really still would welcome your help in getting the word out to your communities about running. And we have tons of tools on our website under resources. And if you go into resources, you'll see a link called Filling Vacancies. And in that you have letters to the editor, Front Porch Forum, posts, social media images that you can use. So just, we ask you to please spread the word. And because ultimately what we want to do is to fill as many seats as possible through the electoral process and not have to make appointments later on. So that's all I have.
Great, on to me. So unless there's any questions for Debbie. So I'm going to talk about, oh, I'm sorry.
Looks like Barbara has her hand
Roberta has
raised.
a question.
Yeah.
Oh,
This is just a quick question actually for Debbie and Carrie too. Gaston and I were going to do an email before the webinar and we didn't get it done. But is it still, we could still use your webinar, I mean, your email template and then send it out and say they can get it online, right? And send the link. It's recorded.
you can
The webinar.
actually, yes, tomorrow morning on our homepage, the webinar link will be there, the actual video.
Okay.
So you can
Okay.
link right to our homepage and they can watch the webinar, which was a fantastic webinar. And it really
Yeah.
hits on the basics of what being a school board member is. It was really great. So
great.
I definitely encourage that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So my part that I'm going to talk about tonight is our weekly emails. And in the strategic plan KR 1.1.4, we have been challenged to increase our weekly email hits from 62%, which is a pretty good percentage, to 80%. And what I can tell you is that we've gone from 62 in July up to 66. So we are making good progress towards that. And one of the things that we're going to be starting now to hopefully increase our hits from our weekly email is something called Great Idea. It's going to be once a month. I got the idea from our board chair forum. Board chairs, they are great people with great ideas. And they were giving all these great ideas and talking to each other about things that they are doing in their districts. And I thought, geez, wouldn't it be great to share this with all board members? So what there'll be is once a month, we'll have it on there called Great Idea. It'll describe what that district or what that board is doing, and give them a contact name and contact information to actually get, if your board is interested in it, who to talk to get more information about how they did their project. So that'll be once a month. And again, hopefully that will increase our numbers for our email, weekly email. Are there any questions? Thanks.
Thank you so much, Carrie, Debbie, and Sue, and Kara. And thank you for an excellent report. We're gonna move into approving the consent agenda, which would be the November minutes, and then we'll move into the VHI appointment. So could I have a motion to approve the minutes of November? Jim.
I'll make that motion. Oh,
Okay, so Jim moves. Tara, are you okay seconding?
Yep.
Second, okay. Any discussion, any changes or amendments to the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the minutes have passed. Now let's, Linda, if you wouldn't mind, we will reach out, but let you say goodnight. Is that okay? All right. Thank you for being here with us tonight and for being brave and interviewing too. So we'll see you later.
Do we want to pause the recording now, Flor?
Yes, thanks, Dan, for the reminder. Carrie, could you please stop there? It's moving to. Thank you, Carrie. There's a couple of things that I wanted to bring up. One of them, Dan MacArthur and Michael Inners had notified me that it seems like with being VSBA president, you also inherit the spam emails that Neil used to send to us. So now I have them. So now I'm spamming you. So I apologize. And I know it's called confusion to some of you. Please always, if something looks suspicious, don't click any links. And check the email. Is usually the email address is what gives it. Do not respond to any, and especially if this is urgent, right? And if I have an urgency and need to communicate with you, I'd be calling you or I'd be texting you, more than likely. So don't fall into any of those phishing emails. And then just a reminder again that we're not going to be having a meeting in January. And is there any other new business that we should be discussing? Or that you would like us to discuss to do agenda? Okay, so we'll be seeing each other in February. Have a great holiday, everybody. Thank you for your service. Good luck with your budgets. It's going to be a tough year. Hopefully you got some good advice, and you have, we are all partners in this, so reach out to your other board members if you need some support, whether that is just hearing you out or supporting how they're doing things. With that, I'll be looking for a motion to adjourn our meeting. Suzanne moves to adjourn the meeting. A second. Tara and the sweet puppy. Okay, all of those in favor, please signify by saying aye and saying goodbye.
Thank you all.
Thank you for being here, everybody. Bye.
Thank you, Flor. Thank you.
Happy holidays, everybody.
You too. Thank you.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.